Okay, so my presentation's a little bit different than other people's. So I figured, you know, you guys have heard, watched how many lane miles we have and all this kind of stuff. And the theme of the conference is celebrating successes. And one of our biggest successes is that we actually got preservation funding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got there, and it took a long time. So, you know, some of our strategic preservation that we do is a lot of chip seal wheel path, crack sealing, patching, on the concrete side, panel replacements, spall repairs, all that kind of stuff. And we started our strategic preservation program back in 2012 because we didn't have enough money. So we've been funded at about 50% funding in Washington for many, many years, and we've really, really struggled with that. So that's why we brought our strategic preservation program in. This is I know you guys can't read all that, but really what you need to look at is the green, the light green along the bottom. That's our basic preservation funding. And you can see that jump, so that line, that's our current biennium, that's where we are right now, so you can see kind of a jump in our funding. And then beyond that, you can see even more of a jump. That's where we're getting to the 100% preservation funding. So we were at about 50%, and we're going to 100%. So we're finally getting there. But you can also see all of that other stuff, all those different colors. That's what we were having to deliver in terms of fish passage and design build projects, and the legislature chose all these specialty projects that we had to do and all that stuff. So it's been difficult to deliver all of that with the same amount of FTEs that we have. So that's probably our biggest struggle going into this next year and the next 6 years beyond. Hopefully, preservation funding stays that way. When we started back in 2012, we instituted what we called a one-touch policy, which became a two-touch, which became a three-touch and a four-touch because we still didn't have the money. But basically, it was a response to a fiscally constrained capital paving budget. We could not maintain all of our lane miles, so we said, what are we going to do instead? Let's go patch it, and hopefully we can hold everything together. It worked really, really well. We expected crack sealing to last 2 years. We expected patching to last 4 years. We really didn't have a failure. Unless the pavement was honestly too far gone for something that we did, we didn't have failures. Our crack sealing lasted 5-6 years, up to 8 years. It didn't have any problems. It was just the pavement in between that started to fall apart as well. So basically what I'm saying is strategic preservation works. It is amazing for the amount of money that you spend to get that done. A lot of our strategic preservation for flexible pavements is, like I said, crack seal. We use rubberized and mastic. John, you're absolutely right. That mastic works great even on spall repairs and concrete. The only thing that I would say that it doesn't work on is when that spot gets too big. Then you've got this soft mastic that doesn't really do well because it's too much of it in a bigger hole. But other than that, that stuff has been incredible. We do a lot of chip seals, either full width or just the wheel paths. The wheel paths have saved us. We have studded tire wear just like Alaska and Oregon DOT. They have saved us mightily in safety issues with half-inch plus rutting. We've actually chip sealed wheel paths with 2 inches of studded tire wear, and it doesn't completely get rid of the ruts, but it does a really, really good job of filling those ruts until we can come back and do something else. Of course, we do patching. Try to stay away from blade patching, but we know that that still happens, especially on our maintenance side. We do some thin overlays, an inch or so, maybe 3/4 of an inch, but most of our stuff is mill and fill, which we call a preservation treatment or a rehab instead of strategic preservation. And then patching like in a wheel path or for a pothole or different things like that. We see in Washington a ton of top-down cracking. So you look at that pavement and you think, oh my gosh, that pavement is failing. We've got some serious problems, but no. It's just the top 2 inches, and if we can catch it in time, all we have to do is remove the top 2 inches, replace that, and the rest of the structure is just fine. Top-down cracking typically occurs when you've got at least 6 inches of hot mix as your structure. What we see is it drives the distresses to the top, and all you have to do is a simple mill and fill and get rid of that. So we're fortunate for the people that came way before me, and they thought to design most of our pavements fairly thick. We have a lot of our pavements that exhibit top-down cracking, and it's absolutely been a godsend for us to be able to try to keep on top of that. Like I said, we do a lot of chip seals, wheel path chip seals just like this. The bottom picture shows you what the rutting on this project was, so fairly significant rutting, and we were able to fill it with a chip seal just in the wheel paths, and it's something that, you know, basically lasts until we can do a chip seal on that route. And it fills the ruts, so we don't have to pre-level or mill or anything like that. So it's been a godsend for us as well. Like I said, we do patching. It could be all the way down to base course, or it could just be a mill and fill for those top 2 inches if we have some severe looking like alligator cracking, but it's really just that top-down cracking. We've done anywhere from 1.5 feet wide, which I wouldn't recommend for compaction purposes, to a full lane width wide, or just the wheel paths. We typically recommend about 3 or 4 feet wide so that you can get decent compaction. That's probably your best bet. On the rigid side, we do panel replacements. We actually started a program back in about 2010 where we did what we called triage on our concrete pavements, which was a combination of spall repair, panel replacements, and then a diamond grind, or double retrofit, panel replacements, and a diamond grind, just to hold those pavements together because they're so expensive to reconstruct. It has, again, saved us like crazy. We do a ton of panel replacements still. Our biggest problem is spall repairs and making sure that they stay in place. So we've went away from cementitious products and towards the epoxy products to get our spall repairs to work. We have done some slab jacking, and of course we do grinding as well. One of the things that we always get asked is, how do you make this all work? And it really comes down to communication. We've got multiple different offices all across the state that we work with, all of our region materials engineers. We have 6 regions within the state. We have, of course, the pavement office and the pavement management engineer with the pavement management system. Everybody has access to that, but we've got to make sure that we're getting the right information out to them, choosing the right projects at the right time so that we're doing the right things. We've also got the money people and program management that we have to deal with. And then, of course, coordinating with maintenance to make sure that maintenance is doing the strategic preservation, or we're contracting that out. We do a combination of that. But communication is absolutely key. We've got to have that communication to make this work. If you don't, you have things like what John was talking about, where you had some significant patching and then you go and mill it out 2 years later, and you just wasted a lot of money with that. And we've had that too, so you're not the only one, John. In terms of locating, where this needs to go, obviously we work with maintenance. They see those roads all the time, but we actually do have something in our pavement management system that actually, when we rate the pavements, we actually can show where we think that we need patching based on, if you read all the details above, medium longitudinal cracking, alligator cracking at some certain percentage, those different types of things. We actually can calculate what we think we need as patching versus chip sealing versus crack sealing. So we have that as well in our pavement management system that can lead our regions to making sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time. And then the other thing that we do is we have what's called HATS, but it's our maintenance management system, basically, They track all the work that they do on the maintenance side, and that gets uploaded into our pavement management system as well, so that they know where that work is done and what was done, so that we try to keep track of that, especially when we were doing the 2 and 3 and 4 touches, making sure that we were sort of, taking care of that entire project so that we could limp it along until a capital project came along. So John talked a little bit about costs, but basically there's a report out there. The link is at the bottom, but there's some pretty good information. That report was written a few years ago now, but we did look at costs, and basically crack sealing, as expected, is one of the cheapest things that you can do. We were able to get 3 to 4 years on average, but we definitely saw more than 5 years life extension just with crack sealing. So, I mean, it works. It stays in place. We do not route our cracks, and it works just fine. I know that some people, say that you've got to route them, but we've not really had any problems with not routing them. Our biggest problem is if we don't clean them right? Some costs for the chip seal stuff, blade patching, and then of course patching like a dig out is probably our most expensive, because most of those dig outs are usually 2 inches or more deep, depending on the region. Everybody has seen this before, but basically what I'm saying here is maintenance costs, even though our costs have been increasing because we have pavements that are in worse and worse condition, even though our maintenance costs are increasing, it's still cheaper than any kind of rehab that we can do typically. Our chip seal rehabs, that number actually needs to be increased a little bit. We're seeing about $50,000 to $70,000 for per lane mile for a typical chip seal. And our maintenance costs have gone up, so all of those have gone up. But still, you can't beat doing strategic preservation if you've got to hold that pavement together. Some of our typical rigid pavement costs, because that wasn't included in that report, spall repairs are costing us anywhere from $500 to $1,500. Half panel replacement is about $8,000, and then a full panel replacement is anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 typically for us. So, it's still well worth it to replace one panel that's, say, shattered and causing some ride issues and some other issues than it is to, worry about, doing a full rehabilitation project or anything like that. So one thing that I said we started back in 2012, and it was a little bit before that because we had a couple of regions on board. So back in the 2009-2011 biennium, we were putting about $2.5 million per biennium towards strategic preservation. This biennium, we're spending approximately $30 million doing strategic preservation. And we have no reason to stop doing that strategic preservation, even though we're 100% funded. This is still a great life extension. It's still well worth doing it. Even though we're spending a lot of money doing it, it's still well worth putting that money to it, extending that pavement life anywhere from 3 to 5 or more years, and then being able to do our rehabilitation afterwards. So we have no intention, even though we're 100% preservation funding, we have no intention of stopping the strategic preservation program. Like I said, we were fortunate enough to get up to 100% preservation funding. So this last biennium, we were about $250 million for our biennium. This year, or this biennium, we're up to about $422 million, and then we'll be up to a little over $500 million, and then almost $600 million the next biennium. So the Move Ahead Washington package that I talked about yesterday, along with IIJA, basically gave us money over 10 years. Usually our legislature is pretty darn controlling about how that money gets put out. They did not tell us when we had to spend that money over the 10 years. So as an agency, we decided to front load that with the promise that the legislature will continue to fund preservation. So we've actually front loaded that over the next 4 to 6 years, hoping that we can do that work that we need to do. That will be the challenge, is actually delivering. But that's our hope, is that we're gonna front load that, be at 100% funding, and try to deliver that preservation program for not just pavements, but all of our assets. So that'll be our struggle, big time. Like I said, a little bit of a different presentation, but I really wanted to focus on the strategic preservation part. It works. It's very cost effective. Like I said, we don't have any intention going away from it, even though we're at 100% preservation funding. It definitely extends pavement life. We've had very, very few failures when it comes to strategic preservation touch. If you can do it early, that's the best time to do it, because then you can spend a lot less money and just do a crack seal typically, or a small patch and not have that pothole grow or anything like that. And the other thing is tell your story. We've been on this bandwagon, on our pedestal, everything for 12 plus years. We've been saying the same story. We're only at 50% preservation funding, and they finally listened. So tell your story, keep telling your story, even though you think they're not listening, keep telling the story. So it does work. It eventually comes to fruition, but that's my my takeaway after being at this for a long time, over a decade. That's it. Anybody have any questions for me?
What was the gradation that you were using on the chip seals for the rut filling, and did you use more than one layer on those?
No, we didn't, and we used the same gradation that we use that's in our standard spec book. So we have a 3/8 to number 4, and that's usually what, we actually have a 1/2 to number 4 too, but that's usually what gets used, is 3/8 to number 4.
Do you have anything out there on the internet about the strategic preservation that I could find?
We have gray notebook articles that talk about it. I don't know that we have any one thing. You know, that report that we pointed to is when we first started, basically, and that's a good report.
Is it talked about in your gray notebook?
Yeah,
Okay.
So if you go to our Gray Notebook archives on our website, December's is the pavement one every year. So you don't have to go to all of them quarterly, but December is the one that will be reported in. And we talk about it a lot.
I'm glad you guys are fully funded for Perez. It seems like sometimes I have to point out that our neighboring states are doing things that, you know, that competition thing actually matters when you're trying to communicate. So I'm going to probably have to point them to that. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Kim.
Hey, Greg.
I'm one of your residents of Washington State, so I can vouch for the work you're doing from a preservation standpoint. But I get to teach across the country, and so I want to make sure I'm clear. The one-touch process is when a road is identified for strategic preservation or capital improvement, you're pushing that information to your districts or regions so that they go out and that band that you showed where patching or whatever is required, that's a fantastic graphic. That tells the districts where the hot spots are, and they can go address that, and basically what that does is increases your PCI over the whole section length, right? And so that's making that section an even primer. I don't know if that's a word that I'm intending, but it's even more important to do preservation at that point, right?
Yes. Our biggest struggle is, unfortunately, we don't have a pavement management administrator. We're hiring right now to fill that position. We haven't had that for a while. So unfortunately, our pavement management system doesn't show that jump in PCI or PSC was what we call it. It doesn't show that jump so that the curve comes back down. So all we're doing is sort of manually pushing that project out a minimum of 2 years and then watching every one of those projects, which is a lot of work, to make sure that we're catching it at the right time still. So yes, it absolutely is critical that we're catching it at the right time, but when we were 50% funded, that's when we were doing the 1, 2, 3, 4 touches sometimes to keep on pushing it out. I don't recommend that. That's actually hurt us in the long run, especially on our chip seal routes where we have some significant rutting. We used to do, a long time ago, chip seals on a 6-year cycle. We went to condition-based, which has been great for lowest life cycle cost. We typically do chip seals anywhere from 8 to 12 years now, depending on area and location and traffic and all that kind of stuff. But because we pushed them out so far, we're getting some significant rutting, and we really have to do a refresh on a lot of those pavements, which is either a mill and fill, or if we can get away with it, filling those ruts and then doing a chip seal over top of it, which is costing us more in the long run.
Final point, we did do a case study of Washington in the R26 program, talking about preservation on high volume routes, and we used the example that you were showing that you were underfunded, and so you decided to take your state routes less than 10,000 ADT and maintain them only in chip seal wearing course. Is that still your strategy, or are you backing up on that a little bit since you're flush now?
So we still do chip seals up to ADT of 10,000. We did have a chip seal conversion program that we stopped doing about 4 years ago because we didn't actually have the money to convert HMA routes to chip seals that were ADT of less than 10,000. But we will go back to that now that we're completely funded. So yeah, we definitely have seen a lot of cost savings with converting a lot of our lower volume routes to chip seals.
At the beginning of your presentation, you were saying how you use the pavement management system to find bends and select projects that way. But then towards the end, you said that your legislature was kind of controlling about project selection. Can you sort of elaborate how you select projects?
The legislature in Washington does tell us, if they give us a tax gas increase or anything like that, pretty much they tell us which projects need to be done, and they're always high-profile projects. So the legislature has always done that for us. This year, when we got the Move Ahead Washington package, because it was funding preservation, that's the one time that they didn't do that. So in terms of rehabilitation and preservation, we've always had the say on that, which comes from our pavement management system. In terms of larger projects, like the tunnel that we had to replace the Alaskan Way Viaduct, a lot of high-profile stuff on Interstate 405 and things like that. The legislature actually takes a portion of our money and says, you will do this project. So we have to balance that a lot, and we've always had that. So that's where you saw all of those top colors. Those are all projects that the legislature has chosen, and we must deliver because of a gas tax or something that was delivered for that specific project. And then there's always been the preservation funding at the bottom that we actually get to control.
In terms of changing their attitude for the fully funded, how much of the discussion did it finally sink in that good roads are cheaper?
Honestly, I have no idea what made them change their mind. Maybe they got tired of us complaining. I don't know. I honestly don't know what made them change their mind, but I do know that we've been telling the same sob story for over a decade, and we finally did get a fairly large package to fund specifically preservation.
So I used to live in Washington, so I'm kind of familiar with the weather, and I know that it rains all day, every day, like almost all year.
On the west side.
On the west side. So I was just curious, I was always curious, how do you schedule your projects, like for preservation and maintenance? Like you just have a really narrow window, or you just have to pray, oh, it's not going to rain today, or with the rain?
So that's the misconception, and that's just to keep people away from Washington, honestly. It doesn't actually rain every day, all day. We actually have a pretty darn good summer on the west side. Yeah. We can pave anywhere from March through October, honestly. We're still paving right now. We've got basically the same weather as what we have right here in New Mexico right now, which is alarming, but for other reasons. So we actually do have a fairly good paving window, but we definitely are not like Texas and Arizona where they have all year round.
Yeah. So you just don't do anything during those times when it rains all day, every day?
Pretty much no.
If there's a pothole, you just leave it?
If it's a bad enough pothole on a route, we'll go and cold patch it, but that's about it for the winter time. Thank you, guys. And then...
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.